And yeah, sorry guys, I am transitioning, so I'll put on my camera here in a little bit once I get to my desk.
Okay.
Sue, I just saw your question about minutes. I would say if you can take the high level minutes about motions and just major actions that are taken, that's fine. We have the meeting recorded in detail, so you don't have to take copious notes on things that are said and all of that.
I'm prepared.
Okay.
Well, there's Sue Hoot.
Everybody is here. And Carolyn, are we able to, Carolyn?
You're ready.
Are we able to hear and at least hear everybody? I know Janelle, we won't see her for a few seconds.
I think we're good. You're ready to start.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. And I will read very quickly that this meeting is held pursuant to and in compliance with emergency ordinance number 20-A/16, emergency ordinance to ensure the continuity of government during the COVID-19 disaster. Committee members who are electronically present at this meeting are, and I've got everybody: James Dean, Bill McLaughlin, Tony Caguto, Michaela Carty, via Lapiso Kirtley, Steve Cameron, Virginia Newton, Sue Friedman, Karen Gavrilovic, Andy Reitelbach, Carolyn Schaefer, Valerie Long, Janelle Cockrell, and Corey Claiborne. Sorry. Persons responsible. Do I have to read the persons responsible for receiving public comments are Places29 North Community Advisory Committee?
Yes, please.
Okay.
If you can read that in the next couple of
opportunities
points.
for the public to access and participate in the electronic meeting are posted in the Albemarle County calendar. Okay. Please note that chat is disabled. If you send someone something in the chat, this is sent to the meeting administrator, and to ask a question, use the raise hand feature to indicate that you would like to speak. This will add you to the queue of speakers in the order that it was received. And once again, we got Andy Reitelbach, Michaela Carity, and Carolyn Schaefer. And the first order of business will be to adopt the meeting minutes from the May meeting. And did everybody get the copy of the meeting minutes? You didn't get it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Did
The
you
only
guys
thing-
tell me where to find them? I couldn't find them. Are they on site?
I think Michaela sent them out in an email this afternoon.
Double check, but I'll forward to you, Karen, now.
Okay.
Make sure, just resend.
Maybe I just missed it. Thanks.
Okay. The other thing I noticed was that this third line in the members, it's had senior planner underlined, and then there's nobody there. So I think we can eliminate that phrase senior planner. And then as far as attendees, we should probably add the county attorney, Greg Kampner. Okay. And going down to the very end, I think the mistake was also in the agenda, but the next meeting is listed as 06 May 2021. It should be 13 May. So the only corrections I have, the minutes. Okay. I'll give you a few minutes to. Does everybody have access to the minutes and can vote yay or nay? All right. Can we, I don't know that we necessarily can call the roll, but Carolyn, if you can unmute anybody, and I'll just ask for any objections. Or all in favor. either raise your hand or say aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposed?
Not opposed, Bill, but I wasn't at the meeting, so I need to abstain.
Okay. Okay. I'll make a note of that. Okay. So the minutes are hereby approved. And do we also need to approve the agenda? We approve the agenda? I didn't see that in the.
No, you don't need to,
Oh, okay.
just minutes.
Oh, agenda review. Okay. So the next item, I will just turn this over to Andy. And we'll get the briefing from RST residents on their revised application presentation.
Good afternoon or good evening, everybody. My name is Andy Rettelbach, and I am a senior planner with Albemarle County Planning Division. And I've been the planner who's been leading the review of the rezoning application ZMA 2020 007 RST residences. So I'm going to give just a brief presentation and overview of this project and where we are at in the process. And then I will turn it over to Valerie Long, who is a representative for the applicant, and she will then give a presentation on the revisions and changes to the plan. As many people are probably aware, this is a rezoning application. So it requires legislative review, which means that Board of Supervisors approval is required for this application. The application is first reviewed by county staff and other agencies such as VDOT and the Service Authority. It then goes to the Planning Commission and then finally the Board of Supervisors. And with this application, it went to the Planning Commission originally on March the 2nd, and then the Planning Commission voted to defer taking an action on the application at that time to allow the applicant to make changes and revisions based on what was heard at that meeting by both the planning commissioners and community members who spoke. So the application will still need to go back to the Planning Commission for them to take an action before it moves on to the Board of Supervisors, who will make the final decision to either approve or deny this application. So it's just a brief recap. This is a rezoning, as I mentioned, and the application is reviewed for consistency with several things, including the property future land use designation is found in the comprehensive plan in the Places29 master plan with state and local standards and regulations and with guidelines of the Architectural Review Board, because this project is within an entrance corridor. So this project, as many people are probably aware, it is a request to rezone 2 parcels of land that total about 19.5 acres. The applicant is requesting that the property be rezoned from its current zoning of R1 residential, which allows 1 dwelling unit per acre, to PRD planned residential development, which allows for up to 34 dwelling units per acre plus limited commercial uses. And in the Places29 master plan, this property is designated as urban density residential and privately owned open space. Most is urban density residential, and then there is a narrow strip along Route 29 that's designated as the open space. So the timeline, as I mentioned, it did originally go to a public hearing with the Planning Commission on March the 2nd. At that meeting, the Planning Commission voted for an indefinite deferral of 6-0 to allow the applicant to make revisions to the application. Several weeks ago in April, the applicant resubmitted the application with revisions, with changes, and staff review of that revised proposal is currently ongoing. And as part of that, the applicant also requested to come to the CAC meeting tonight to update the CAC and the community on those updates and revisions. And then, as I mentioned, it does need to go to the Planning Commission, and I wanted to really highlight this because this was just confirmed recently that it's scheduled to go back to the Planning Commission in about a month on Tuesday, June the 15th, 2021. That meeting begins at 6:00 p.m. And for anyone who's already on my contact list, I will be sending out more information as we get closer to that meeting, probably about a week before, which is when the agenda and the staff report is available, as well as the Zoom link for attending that meeting. So that's just something I wanted to highlight, that this application is currently scheduled right now to return to the Planning Commission in about a month on June the 15th. And then, as I've mentioned, it would ultimately have to go to the Board of Supervisors for a public hearing, as the Board of Supervisors makes the final decision to either approve or deny this application. And the meeting with the Board of Supervisors is not currently scheduled at this time. If you have any questions, or if you're not currently on my contact list and you'd like to be added to that to get more information as we get closer to the second Planning Commission meeting and to the Board of Supervisors meeting, my email is at the bottom of this screen, and just email me, let me know that you'd like to be added to the contact list, and I'd be happy to do that. That's all I have tonight, and now I will turn it over to Valerie Long with Williams Mullen, who is the representative for the applicant. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Andy, and good evening, everyone. My name is Valerie Long. I'm with Williams Mullen. Please forgive my background. I am trying to coordinate with my son had a high school soccer game this evening, so I was able to be here and see the first half, but I'm now sitting in my car so I can participate with all of this and not miss out. I want to first thank Andy and Michaela and certainly the chairman, Mr. McLaughlin, for all the assistance they provided to us over the last few weeks in helping to coordinate the meeting tonight. We're certainly appreciative of the opportunity to be here and share the updated plans with you all. Just to let you know, Scott Copeland, who is the representative, the developer with RST Development, is also on with us tonight. And also my colleague, Charlie Alvis, who many of you have met, and who's going to be helping with the logistics of our screen, of sharing his screen and working the slides. So I know that most of you know all about it. You all have been paying a lot of attention. So I'm going to sort of really focus our presentation tonight on the revisions that we've made to the plans since the Planning Commission. And certainly we're happy to answer questions that any of you all may have. But we are excited about the changes. We really took the comments and input to heart that we have received from the community really over the last year and a half since we've been working on the application, and particularly those comments that we heard at the Planning Commission, both from the members of the public, from the Planning Commission, and certainly the comments and input that we've received from Andy and his other colleagues in the Community Development Department over the last few months, and they've assisted us with input over the last few weeks as well. So we'll go ahead and move to the next slide. And just
Charlie and Valerie, sorry to interrupt. We can see the notes version of the presenter mode. And I think you're able to switch that by clicking on the display settings, I believe.
Can you see that there at the top of the screen, Charlie? Yep. Thank you, Michaela.
No problem. And then swap the view, yes.
Did that help?
Not yet.
Or is that still the same? I'm sorry.
There we go. You're good now.
Maybe.
Thank you, Michaela. So I know that certainly all the residents of Forest Lakes know the property, but I think everyone else generally knows the location too. But we've highlighted there to show its proximity to Ashwood Boulevard. Go ahead, next slide. Go ahead, next slide, Charlie. I don't know if you heard me. Okay, great. This is
Okay.
a,
No, sorry.
we can, thanks. This is a
Okay.
rendering of the revised plan. I'm going to go through this really quickly because we have a few other slides that highlight some of the changes, but we wanted to show this very briefly. And we'll go through in great detail the revisions that we've made to the plan since the earlier draft. Next slide. There we go. This is an aerial view of the revised plan, just to show it is in many respects similar to what you all saw before in terms of its general alignment and layout, with the main entrance is on Route 29 in the lower left corner. You can see in the foreground the large wooded area that is VDOT's land, and also part of that is the cemetery that's on site that would be preserved and not disturbed. And then, of course, we have the connection to Ashwood Boulevard on the right. Next slide. We can always come back to these slides as well if needed. We'll go through the list of the changes that we've made since the last meeting, and then again, I'll show some additional images that will highlight this. Probably the most significant change is that the number of total dwelling units has been reduced from 370 to 340 units. There's a new layout for the townhouses. With the original plan, there were 8 rows of townhouse units, and we've removed 2 of the 8 rows. So that was a total reduction of 32 units there. And the rear portion of each of the remaining 6 rows of townhouse buildings has a step down on it on the side that is closest to the Ashwood neighborhood. So instead of the end unit that's closest to the neighbors being a 4-story building, it's now a 3-story building, which helps with the transition from the 2-story residences on the other side of the property line to the 2 stories, then 3 stories at the end unit, and then the rest of those buildings are 4 stories. And then similarly, there's a slight adjustment to the apartment layout. Originally, we had the 2 5-story buildings and 3 3-story buildings. We now have the 2 5-story buildings, each have a step back on the 5th floor, and we have some images we'll show you of what we mean by that. And then the other buildings were increased in height from 3 floors to 4 floors to try to recapture some of the living space that was lost with the removal of the 2 rows of townhouse units. And next slide. Great. We heard a lot about the need for more enhanced open space at the community meeting, and we really took that input to heart and think that the feedback we received was, really challenged our design team to come up with ways to improve it. And I think they've done a great job with that. So we'll show you and highlight on the next slide how we've added some green space and additional open area between 2 of the rows of townhouse buildings. We also have enhanced buffers and screening on site. It was always the intention to retain the berm along Ashwood Boulevard, but we recognized after the Planning Commission meeting that we clearly had not highlighted that enough. So we want to reiterate that that berm will be preserved. We've added a note to the plans to that effect to make that more clear. We're also committing to adding additional landscaping along that berming area as needed. And then one of the 8 townhouse buildings that was removed was the one that was closest to Ashwood Boulevard. We heard a lot about that from the Forest Lakes community at the Planning Commission meeting. So we took that comment to heart and we removed that building completely. So as a result, the first townhouse that's closest to Ashwood Boulevard is now set back much further away. And that space is now open space, which we'll show you. And then we enhanced the affordable housing. We had not officially resubmitted this at the time of the Planning Commission meeting. We know that created a little bit of confusion at the meeting, which we regret. So we have clarified on our application plans the commitment that 75% of the apartment units within the project will be affordable for a 30-year period. Next slide. We have enhanced the pedestrian orientation throughout the property. Among other things, we've improved the pedestrian access from the townhouses to the central amenity and pool area. And we'll highlight this a little bit better once we get to the next slide with the conceptual plan. But we think the revisions to the green space and the townhouses and the connection to the pool area, not only did it help really connect the entire community together better, but it improved the pedestrian access as well. And then we also spent some time working to better integrate the central amenities into the townhome residents. And then finally, we talked a little bit about this at the meeting before, but did not have anything official on our plans at the time, which was a commitment to coordinate with the county and the transit division to accommodate a transit stop in whatever location the transit staff or other county staff determined to be the most appropriate location. We have shown 3 potential locations on the plan. We're very open and flexible about that. It's not any type of a decision as to where they would be, but just to demonstrate that there are potential locations, and most importantly, that the applicant is willing to accommodate one and have one wherever it makes sense. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, so here's the original plan that you all saw at the Planning Commission meeting. And as you can, and I'm just orient everybody briefly, just in case anyone, because this looks a little bit different, but on the right-hand side is Ashwood Boulevard. Towards the bottom of the screen, you can see just a portion of it there. In the bottom right corner is the intersection with 29 and Ashwood. And so you can see the red arrows going left to right. That shows the connection to Ashwood Boulevard, and it'll connect to what's going to eventually be called Archer Boulevard, which will lead to Brook Hill. And so you can see the 8 buildings in sort of a tan or pale yellow color. Those are townhouse buildings. And as you can see, that there were 8 of those buildings in the original plans. And if you'll go to the next slide, Charlie. There we go. So this is the revised townhouse layout. And as you can see, there are now 6 buildings of townhouses there. So working from the right, closest to Ashcroft, you can see where originally there was a townhouse building. That area is now shown as open space. It's green space, and it replaces that building. It also shows that that berm will be preserved. And then there is a central green area in between that really opens that space up well, adds significant additional open space, amenity space. And right across the street from it is, again, what we're calling the central amenity area. It's a swimming pool area. There'll be some outdoor gathering space. And we've worked with the civil engineers to really visually connect those 2 areas together much better than originally. There's now better pedestrian access to that area. So we think it integrates the apartments and the townhouses together in a way that's better for everyone and much better for pedestrian access, and helps just improve the overall project in terms of improving the quality of life for the residents who would be there. And then finally, you can see the 3 potential locations for a transit stop. I can't see the one on the far bottom of my screen. I don't know if others can, but it's essentially right on 29 North. Again, those are all conceptual potential. This image shows, this is a rendering of a potential what the townhouse units might look. And this is intended to show how on the end unit that's closest to the neighborhood, that 4th floor would not exist, that would go away. So it would be a 3-story unit closest and would, again, transition. It would be a more gentle transition between the 2 and 4 stories. Next slide. Great. We talked a little bit about the step back request. As a reminder, under the county ordinances, there is a preference for buildings that are 4 floors or taller to have a 15-foot step back. And we had requested originally that be waived and modified for both the 4th and 5th floor. In working with the community development staff, they had a good suggestion, which was to at least do it for the 5th floor. So that's what we've tried to visually render here. We have modified that application request to ask that it be modified for the, or that it be waived for the 4th floor, provided that we do it for the 5th floor. And so this is, on your left-hand side, you see one of the 4-story apartments, and on the right-hand side is the 5-story apartment building. And you can see how the sort of green stripe area is that will be stepped back. That would essentially be removed. That, again, across the entire frontage of the building removes a significant amount of living space from that unit. So it requires some rearranging to ensure that there's enough units. And you can see that there's, in between those two buildings, you can see below, it's the travel lane, and it shows the parking and the sidewalks and so forth for a frame of reference in terms of their proximity to one another. Next slide. This is an architectural rendering of the 5th-story building, 5-story buildings. And again, it's 2 buildings are connected, as you can see, with this walkway that's open air. And you can see, hopefully you can see that the 5th floor is stepped back on that building as well. And so that's what we were trying to show and demonstrate with this image. You can't see it quite as well on the building that's on the left because of the angle this is at, but you can see it a little bit, but it's really intended to show it from this particular angle. So there'll be some open space up there top, reduce the massing of that building. Next slide. We wanted to highlight again where the buffers are. We realized we probably didn't do that very well. We have always had a 20-foot buffer minimum around the entire perimeter of the property. Along Route 29, we have a 100-foot buffer. That's a requirement, or it's a strong recommendation of the Places 29 master plan, which is a component of the comprehensive plan. And that same buffer exists along, for instance, along the frontage of the Brookhill project. So we wanted to obviously be consistent with that master plan recommendation. But we also have the 20-foot buffer along the entire perimeter. One issue we did not highlight well in our prior planning commission meeting, it's always been a note on our plans, and this was actually a suggestion of one of the residents in Forest Lakes. We have a note on the plan that says, we know that in some areas along that back wall or the back side of the property behind the townhouses, in some places the vegetation is already quite dense. In other places it's far less so. And so we've added a note to the effect that in places where the screening is not very dense, that the applicant would supplement that screening with additional vegetation, or you could add a fence. But that we recognize in some areas there may be some additional plantings that would be appropriate and necessary to help provide some basic screening. We don't think it's going to, we don't want to imply that the buildings will not be visible from the adjacent neighbors, but we do acknowledge that some areas are not as well screened and could be supplemented. Next slide. We also wanted to highlight the distances of those buildings from the edge of the property line. And again, you can see the area, this sort of orange band represents the 20-foot minimum vegetated buffer. And then, as you can see, depending on which of the rows of buildings, the closest that any of those townhouse buildings are to the adjacent property line is 64 feet. And the 2 buildings in the middle are actually set back even further. They're 88 feet from the property line. Next slide. I wanted to try to put the buffers in context. There's actually not a requirement in the zoning ordinance. In the planned residential development district, that's the proposed zoning that we've applied for. There's not a requirement for a vegetated buffer. The reason we selected 20 is because that's what is required when you have, for example, commercial or industrial districts or uses that are adjacent to residential or rural uses. Buildings, for one thing, buildings have to be set back either 50 or 100 feet from an adjacent property line. So as you can see, under conventional commercial zoning districts, if you have that, if our land were zoned commercial, any buildings on it would have to be set 50 feet back from the adjacent residential property. If it were zoned light industrial, it would have to be 50 feet. And if it was zoned heavy industrial, it would have to be 100 feet back. So those are sort of the baselines that we looked at. And so we tried to put them back as far as we could, obviously, but also make sure that we had enough space to provide the necessary infrastructure, parking, building, open space, et cetera, on site. So we compare that to the 64 feet and the 88 feet that the RST buildings are set back from the residential area. And then likewise, if the property were zoned commercial, there would have to be a minimum 20-foot buffer undisturbed along the adjacent property line with the residential neighborhood. So we thought that was a good baseline to go with. And then in industrial districts, it's a little bit larger, obviously, because of the difference in the use. So, and again, comparably, we have 20 feet and then 100 feet along 29. Those other buffers and setbacks are required by the zoning ordinance, and they are voluntary for this project. We wanted to just try to put those into context and explain why and how we had arrived at those distances. Next slide. This is an updated version of an exhibit that we showed previously and has kind of, I think, always been on our application plans. And this is now on the updated application plan as well, to show do a better job showing the distance between the existing homes that are in the neighborhood, the distance between those homes and the property line, showing the buffer there where the taller trees are. And you can see that where the property line is in the middle, and then show that they're, the buildings are not right up against the property line, how they're set back. And then also wanted to use that to show how that building steps down towards the neighborhood from four stories to 3 stories. And then we have, this section view was from Cricklewood Court. This section view is from the existing townhouses that are adjacent. I hope that helps. And those are on our plans. I believe it's on the last page. Next slide. These are some of the same renderings that we showed at the Planning Commission meeting. I will just clarify, these have not been updated to reflect changes to the building. But we did want to just show them again as a reminder, sort of, I know there's a lot of interest in retaining the trees that are, the trees you see in this image that are visible so much from Route 29 and from Ashwood and the intersection there. And just to reiterate that the vast majority of those trees that you see are on the VDOT parcel that will remain, and we don't control that VDOT parcel. We don't have the right, even if we wanted to go in and clear any of those trees, but certainly there's no desire to do so. So if you'll go to the next slide, we tried to show how the buildings will be behind those, and the architects, if you can see that a little bit, they tried to sort of have the trees fade out a little bit so that you could see the buildings behind them. And again, these building renderings haven't been updated. They reflect the old design, but I don't think changing them would have impacted this image. So we wanted to just show you and make that a little bit more clear that those trees will remain and that berm will remain, and that while certainly the buildings, there will be some level of visibility of the buildings, they won't be invisible, but that it's not going to be wide open, and the site will not be bare, that it will look, we think this is representative of what it will look like. I think we have another slide, maybe 1 or 2 more that are similar to this.
Valerie, are you all getting close to the end of your presentation? Or
We are, yes,
okay.
Thank you. I think we just have maybe 1 or 2 more.
Okay.
And this is one obviously taken from Ashwood. We showed this at the Planning Commission as well. Again, this hasn't been adjusted or updated to reflect the new building design or building heights at all, but it does, again, our effort to demonstrate that the trees that are within the VDOT parcel and along that berm will not be removed, other than the ones that are necessary to create the connection to Ashwood. Any trees that are not on our property that don't require coming down for the Ashwood connection, there's no plans to remove them, and frankly, no ability to remove them. Next slide, if there is one, that may be the last one.
I think the rest of our slides are just overview of the concept plan and the application plan and so on. So
Right.
that's just there for reference if folks would like to see them.
Yeah, so this is one, for example, that we tried to highlight a little bit better the amenity areas and the open space areas in green. If we could just maybe show that, Charlie, if you can use your cursor to point out the amenity green space area. So obviously the new one here in the middle, and then you have the pool area, and then moving down to the lower left, there's a plaza area there. Yep, right there. That area has always been there. We didn't highlight it in our earlier plans, and we wanted to do so now. You can also see just right in the end of that 5-story building, because of the building step back of 15 feet on both sides, it opened up some rooftop space that can be there. So the owners don't know what that space will be yet, but some sort of outdoor gathering space for the residents. And then right across the street around that traffic circle, there's 2 smaller plaza areas, one right there, and then one to the right. And then on the far right side of the page, this one has always been there. There's a tot lot there and a little small outdoor active space. And then finally, the one we mentioned already, where the building used to be there. And we have a similar slide that shows the pedestrian locations, but I think that covers the most, all those revisions. And so we'll stop here. We can leave this up if that would be helpful for people, or we can stop sharing our screen and just answer questions, whichever people prefer. This is a copy of the updated version of the official application plan from our plans.
Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you all.
So before we move to the next portion of the meeting, I'll just share a little bit of detail about the format of the meeting. We'll have 20 minutes for questions and answers from members of the public, as well as CAC members, though we also have, after those 20 minutes of questions and answers, 20 minutes of time for the CAC to discuss. So I'd like to ask the CAC members to give preference to the members of the public that might have questions now, since y'all will have time to discuss in a bit, and Valerie and Charlie will be here to help support with that as well. Another thing I'll mention is that since we have 20 minutes of time for questions and answers, if everyone who would like to participate could use the raise hand feature, that will, by clicking that button, you'll be entered into a queue, and Carolyn is going to help keep an eye on that and go in order of whoever is asked a question first. And also, we ask that you monitor your airtime so that we can get as many questions answered and as many comments heard as possible. Additionally, it's helpful from staff standpoint if y'all could comment on or ask questions about the changes that Valerie has presented. Andy has captured and heard the ongoing comments that relate to the last application. So if you can focus your questions and comments on these updates, that is helpful from the staff's review standpoint. So that's enough from me. I will defer to Carolyn to keep an eye on who has their hand up, and we'll give preference to the members of the public for this first 20 minutes.
All right, is there anybody in any of the attendees that would like to ask a question, make a comment? At this time, I don't have anybody in the attendee section with their hand up.
All right, then we can go with Tony.
So my question is, in the new revised plan, are any of the townhomes in the affordable area? It seemed in the first one there were, but in this one it seemed 75% of the apartments are affordable.
Thank you, Tony. Originally, originally we'd said that 50% of the units overall would be affordable. And we weren't entirely sure at the time if that was going to be just apartments or townhouses, or maybe a blend of both. We know that the developer knows that he can provide the apartments at the affordable levels that he's committed to. The hope is that some or all of the townhouse units could be rental affordable or for sale affordable as well. But we want to be really transparent and clear. It's extremely challenging for those units to be affordable. Particularly for sale price, the current maximum sale price for a unit under the county's regulations is, I believe it's $245,000 thereabouts, which even for these stacked townhouse units is extremely challenging, particularly with the, you may be aware, there's been an incredible increase in building costs just in the last few months in particular, but particularly the last year. So we obviously did not want to commit to having those units be affordable if we weren't positive that we could do it. So there's hope that depending on how it goes, that maybe that would work out. So there's not a commitment that for those to be affordable, but there is a very strong commitment that 75% of the apartments would be affordable. And just for clarification, thank you. Can I add one little bit more detail about the affordability? That it would be the average level of affordability would be to those making 60% of the area median income, just for clarification, which is a much higher standard than is currently required by the county's comprehensive plan. The current rule is 80% of the area median income. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we still don't have anyone from the public. So Sue, you can go ahead. I see your hands up.
Thank you. I understand that the 80 and 60% of the AMI. Can we figure out what that translates to monthly payment for a 1-bedroom apartment?
You know, Sue, I do not have that information off the top of my head.
I do. Good evening.
Okay.
It's Scott, Copeland Valley. Thanks. Thanks for the question. I'm hesitant to give an exact number because it's changing all the time in terms of the income levels. And by the time this project is built, I'm sure it will alter a bit. But typically, for a 2-bedroom household of 4 individuals at a 60% rent would be somewhere in the $1,500 per month rental range, roughly. And, that would obviously, go up by a couple of $100 a month for a 3-bedroom unit, and then obviously lower for a 1-bedroom unit, if that helps answer that question.
So I guess maybe the larger question has to go back to the county, because if I'm making $15 an hour, no way I'm going to afford an affordable apartment. So if a 2-bedroom is 15, then the 1-bedroom is 1,200. About
Approximately, yeah.
That doesn't sound very affordable to me. No, but again, this is not your issue. This is
I understand.
a county issue.
As an affordable developer, I understand 100% what you're saying, and it is a very frustrating thing. There could very well be an opportunity in this instance with the type of financing that we would be seeking to have some units at a lower threshold other than the 60% that would bring that rental rate down. As Valerie indicated, that the average would be at the 60% levels. I don't know the exact numbers. It's just too early to know if that really comes into play. But in terms of reaching the market that you're highlighting, I concur. It's you know, and as Valerie pointed out, the county requirements are at the 80% levels. We're at 60 or below. But I hear you.
One of the things we've been talking about, been hearing from Forest Lakes is it's really maybe a second market that we're looking at, big picture, workforce housing, teachers, firefighters, police officers, county employees, Department of Social Services, you know, as opposed to the AMI, actually look at workforce housing. But again, that's a county conversation that we probably need to have.
Typically, though, in the workforce housing is typically defined as 80 to 120% of AMI. When dealing with affordability, and typically, the low-income housing tax credits, which is a federal program that would finance the project, are associated with the 60% rents. So I understand that this is a bigger community question, but that's just, some of the nomenclature that is standard for these type of projects.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sue. I see Karen has her hand up as well.
Thanks, Michaela. This is a question, I think, for Michaela and for Andy on some process issues. Sounded like, Andy, am I to understand this won't be going back to a second Planning Commission public hearing? It would be simply a business meeting, and then the next public hearing would be at the board level, or will that be determined by how substantial the changes are?
Yeah, I can take that. So in returning to the Planning Commission meeting, it would not necessarily be a public hearing. The public hearing has been held already on March 2nd, and the Planning Commission did the public hearing. However, typically the Planning Commission does open the public hearing when a project like this that is changes comes back. Ultimately, that is at the discretion of the planning commissioners to determine whether to reopen the public hearing and allow additional comments from community members.
Okay.
So that would be the process. It's not required. It is up to the planning commissioners. However, typically, the planning commission has allowed at least some public comments to be made when projects return.
I'm thinking from an advertising standpoint, as long as the proposed density is less than the original, the planning district is the same, and the special exception, as long as those are not, they're not asking for more density, I guess it still falls within the ad that was what was released before. And I'm used to working in other communities. There's a couple of things I'm a little bit confused about. In Albemarle, I don't understand why some of these things that are notes aren't proffers. Like, I know there's some other applications coming in, and things like affordable housing tend to be proffers signed by the developer. These are all notes on the plan. So I'm just trying to understand how that works, because this is not like a density bonus, or that's, that is allowed in some districts and would then be a part of the zoning district itself. There's nothing in the zoning ordinance that commits this. So it really is just the notes on the plan. And then secondly, do you guys get people to, I see there's general conformity to the plan. A lot of these illustrative views are really nice, but what are they actually, what is actually being approved that would then go to site plan or the ARB for review? It wouldn't be some of these illustrations. So help me out there, please.
Certainly. So they are requesting a rezoning to a planned district, the planned residential development. And in the county zoning ordinance, when you have a planned development, you're required to have an application plan. And the application plan becomes the zoning for that property if it's approved by the Board of Supervisors. So when the notes are included on that application plan, they become a part of that plan and then become a part of the zoning. So it's not, it's similar to a proffer, but not a separate proffer statement signed by the applicant or the property owner. Just as a matter of being on the application plan, it becomes a part of the zoning for that property.
So if the developer had to come back and change, say, the affordable housing component because the financing didn't work out, how does that happen in a situation like this?
It depends on kind of the level of change that's made, and I would leave that up to the zoning administrator, and I can also provide you with contact information for the county zoning administrators. They would make the final determination on that. But if changes are made to the application plan, usually it requires the applicant to come back in with a rezoning to amend the application plan, or minimum to come in with a request for a variance from the application plan, which would still go to the Board of Supervisors, but is not a full rezoning public hearing application process.
So any of the illustrative plans that are here would be part of the packet or not? I mean, what's actually going to be looked at site plan time?
Yeah, so it's generally the plan called the application plan. It is a general conformity thing. So again, that is up to the administrator to determine when the site plan comes in, how whether the plan is in conformance with the application plan that has been approved by the board.
Okay, and I promise final question, because I see another hand up. I don't know if this is a question for Valerie or for somebody else. I know there has been clarification, which I appreciate, about the buffer. How much of the buffer and the berm along Ashwood Boulevard, how much of that I'm a bit confused about the future right-of-way area along Ashwood Boulevard. How much of that future VDOT right-of-way is part of this buffer area that's shown on this plan in front of us and is the berm area? In other words, if Ashwood Boulevard were ever to be widened, and there is talk of a flyover and that sort of thing on the Places29 plan, what would happen to that berm? Is that right-of-way part of that berm and buffer area?
Sure. Maybe while I start answering, I'd ask Charlie to put up on the screen either the application plan or the page right after that, the conceptual plan that shows it a little bit better where that future right-of-way land is relative to the berm. But generally speaking, let me get that. Let him get to that page, and there is a lot of that berm is on the RST site. If you can see from this slide, yeah, maybe zoom in on that, Charlie, if you can. That'll probably be easier. The berm is, by its very nature, is a berm and thus on the steep side. So when Charlie zooms in on that, I think you'll be able to see that, so the areas that are steep slopes are sort of a mustardy yellow color. And then, so you can see some of that, Charlie, if you could use your cursor once you get it to the right spot to show, the berm kind of is along the road. A portion of it is on the RST side of the line. You can see that sort of mustard yellow color on that side, and it's also part of it within the buffer. And then adjacent to area that would be recreation area and open space. And then a portion of it is on the VDOT right-of-way side, which is shown with that kind of purplish color overlay. I guess it's actually, yeah, it's purple, but it kind of turns the mustard yellow a little bit of pink, at least on my screen. So it's a little bit of both, but a large area of it is on the RST site. And again, recognizing it's not all of it, that's partly another benefit we think of having that area be open space now instead of an actual building. Charlie, you could maybe also put up the slide that we didn't show yet, but we showed it at the meeting, and I think we have it in reserve of the image that the engineers prepared that shows the trees that would remain and those that would go away if you have those. So does that help? Can you see this better? Well, yeah, let me first go to this. So if you look at the top, now this image does not have the future VDOT right-of-way overlaid, but you can sort of tell where it is. The area between the property line and between the road bed is area that would become future right-of-way. But those trees that are shown, again, this was the original plan, not the revised plan. So you can see that were trees that were going to be retained even with the building in its original location. The ones that were coming out were the ones in sort of the darker orange color on the left, or sort of right in the middle of that upper image, because those had to be removed to facilitate the connection to Ashwood. And then the ones that are in the far corner there adjacent to the townhouses, that's where a sewer line connection would be made. But otherwise, the plan was to retain those trees. And then we tried to have that be shown better in the images below. So,
And if I could just add one thing, Valerie, to answer Karen's question, the buffer, the 20-foot buffer does not depend on the right of way. That's measured from the developer's property line back. So that 20 feet is there no matter, you know, if there's right of way or not right of way or whatever's on the other side. So there's just more space in between the road and the buffer since there's future right of way there.
thank you. Great point. Does that answer your question, Karen?
All right, in our last few minutes of this time for questions and answers, I'm just going to ask if anyone who is listening as an attendee, members of the public, if they have a question or comment they'd like to offer. And I don't see any hands, so Bill, it's you. And you're muted, Bill.
I'm moving my car. Okay, I have a few quick questions, maybe more detailed than you guys are prepared to answer. But these apartment buildings and or the townhouses, especially the top of the 2-on-2, are there any does the architectural plan include any balconies in these units?
First, let me, and maybe Charlie can put the image back on. It's of the sort of
I couldn't
conceptual
tell from the image, you know.
Yeah, and I should clarify, that's just a conceptual image. The buildings haven't actually been designed yet. That's one rendering that one local home building company, Stanley Martin, that's their plans and their architectural renderings. I think they may have been even from a project that where they built those down in a area near Richmond. So we want to be clear, that's not exactly what they would look like. They haven't been designed yet by RST, but we thought it was helpful to show generally sort of an example of what a 2-over-2 townhouse could look like, knowing that that's somewhat of a new type of a product or building style that I was not familiar with it, for instance, before I started working on this project. And I had a very hard time understanding what a stacked townhouse would look like. And so finally, the Stanley Martin representatives shared those with us, which I found it to be very helpful. So that's why we shared to show with others. So it may be there's some balcony space, there may be some rooftop space. I don't know. I think Stanley Martin's images is, if you can sort of see up to the right of the chimneys, it shows as a little, like a pergola there on the roof. Again, these are completely conceptual. Maybe that ends up what happens. Maybe it's different, but they have not been designed yet. So.
Okay, would that design be more complete before it went to the Planning Commission, or does the Planning Commission just make a decision based on concept?
Yeah, it's not typical for that level of detail at the Planning Commission or the board. The project will go before the Architectural Review Board. So they
understand.
will, yeah.
And do you have an idea of the ratio of 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom apartments in the apartment buildings?
I think, you know, I know that Scott and his team have been looking at that. I don't believe there's been any final decisions that have been made, particularly given the modifications to the building, but it'll certainly be some sort of a mix of 1, 2, 3s and I think maybe some 4s also. But Scott Copeland, feel free to jump in if you have anything else to say, but I don't think there's any firm decisions made yet.
There have not been any yet.
So if we don't have an idea of how many 1 bedroom versus 3 or 4 bedroom apartments we're going to have in this development, we really can't make any judgment as to how many new or children from this development will be added to the local schools. Because obviously, the more 2, 3, and you even mentioned possibly 4 bedroom units there are, the more school-age children there are going to be. So that has a big impact on the schools. That's why I asked that question. What about, you're adding 2 5-story apartment buildings? You're adding another story to 2 of the apartment buildings? Am I clear on that?
So there were originally, there are 5 apartment buildings total. Originally, 3 of them were 3-story and 2 of them were 5-story.
Okay. Now they're going to be 4-story. Okay.
The 2 5-stories, and maybe Charlie can point those out using his cursor. The 2 5-stories will remain 5 stories, but they now have a building step back on each of them on the 5th floor. On the one that's to the left, that's on 2 sides, and then the one that's sort of looking facing Route 29, you can sort of see, we tried to show that with the renderings, that step back. So those will still be 5 floors, but with the step back on the 5th floor.
Right.
Yep, Charlie there is showing it. And then the 3 other apartment buildings, if you could quickly point to those, Charlie. One there, and then the other 2 that are closest to Route 29. Those are now proposed to be 4 stories to try and balance out and not have to lose too many units. Knowing that it was so, hearing what we did from the neighbors about the townhouse units and feeling like it was too dense on that side, you know, we tried to just shift the density away from the neighborhood towards Route 29 and adjacent to where there were no neighbors right now.
The 4 and 5-story apartment buildings, are you planning on elevators in those, or will these be walk-ups?
I will let Scott answer that, but I believe if I understand that 4-story, once it's 4 stories, I think it has to have an elevator. Scott, is that correct?
It doesn't have to.
Okay.
It's but they will have elevators.
Okay. So that's a yes. All right.
Yes, that's a yes.
Okay. We have kind of a little bit overrun. Well, actually, we've a lot overrun the question and answer period. So can we transition to the CAC discussion?
I think so, Bill. I'll give it just a minute. This is our last call for any members of the public since we haven't had anyone. I'll just double check, but I'm not seeing any hands raised. So sure, go ahead.
Great. So we can, Charlie, you can stop sharing your screen and we'll let them do it. Thank you. We really appreciate everyone's time, and we'll stick around and be available to answer any more questions that you all may have, if any, for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. I'd like to just turn it over to anyone on the committee that has any comments. If they just want to go ahead and raise their hand. I'll lower mine. No, mine's lowered. Okay.
Well, if I may jump in, I'd like to, I have a question about that VDOT parcel out front. Because are there any plans for that? Or if that could be bulldozed and leveled, all the trees gone, would that make an impact on the site distance to for these 4 and 5-story buildings?
If that's a question for us, Mr. Dean, I'd be happy to try and answer it. I just
Go
want to be
ahead.
sure. Okay, thank you. You know, we do not have any plans for that VDOT parcel other than this sliver that's along Ashwood that VDOT would add to its right of way to help facilitate the vehicular connection to Ashwood, and also would enable RST to build a sidewalk all the way down to the rest of Ashwood to the Route 29 corner. Otherwise, a large portion, the majority of that VDOT parcel will remain and be under VDOT's ownership. You know, they have talked about perhaps trying to put it on the market to sell it. It was actually originally acquired by VDOT. They told us, I think it was Karen mentioned a future flyover that's described in the Places 29 master plan. That was actually apparently a proposal or a project that was associated with the Western bypass when that bypass project was alive. Now that the bypass is no more, that's literally why VDOT is now moved and said, oh, well, we can actually make this right of way, this land that you need as right of way to make this connection and build the sidewalk, because we're not going to be building any flyovers ever. We don't need this land anymore. So we'll let you use it for a sidewalk and a vehicular crossing, and we'll figure out what to do with the rest of it. So that's kind of where it is now. But, you know, to be fair, we can't control VDOT. They may sell it. They may come in. I've never known them to come in and just clear cut a parcel for no reason. But, you know, I certainly wouldn't want to say nothing could happen there. But what we're committing to maintaining the buffer and the trees on site, and, you know, that's the best I can answer. I hope, I know that may not be totally sufficient for you, but.
Okay. Anybody else on the committee with, yeah, B?
Yeah, well, liaison anyway. So question, Valerie, you mentioned the sidewalk, which I think is very important, that goes along Ashwood. Would that sidewalk also go along 29 in front of the development?
I believe that there's already a sidewalk there along the frontage from when, when VDOT widened the road, they put a path in.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that is fantastic. And I also wanted to mention, because I know Sue brought it up, and thank you, Sue. Unfortunately, the only way developers are going to add more affordable housing is through either density or height or both. And so that's the reality of the situation. The fact that prices are going up does not bode well. And the fact that Scott Copeland is an RST, Valerie, they're all committed to having this level of affordable housing is hopeful, frankly. So let's just hope that this all goes through, you know, for their affordable housing aspect. But that's just a reality. We're going to have to face that. We're either going to have to go higher or denser if we want affordable housing. So thank you, Sue, for bringing that up.
I can give you the order of hands raised that I'm seeing on my participants. I see that it's Sue, Corey, Karen, and then Tony.
Okay, I'll go next then.
Okay.
I think the affordable workforce housing issue is one that needs a lot more discussion. There are rent control options. There are many things that other communities do to help with affordable housing. So I think we have to look at many other options, because if I'm making $15 or $20 an hour, this does not help me at all. So maybe we don't care about me as an employee of Albemarle County or as an employee of UVA Health System, being a patient access greeter. Maybe that's not the individual we care about when it comes to affordable housing. But I think it's a big issue and it needs more attention. I'm still concerned about the proposal to let this be a 5-story building, let 5-story buildings. I thought 4-story was usually the limit. And so this had to be a waiver or a special exception to be 5 stories. So I'm still concerned about a 5-story building or multiple 5-story buildings.
Okay, so Corey has his hand up and we haven't heard from you yet. So Corey, can you, you had your hand up? Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I do. It's actually, thanks, Bill. It's more of a question for the design team. Was Sue finished or? I didn't know.
I can absolutely be finished.
Oh, okay. All right. So the question was for the design team, or Valerie and Scott. Thank you all for the presentation. It's come a long way since we've originally seen it at the Planning Commission. Just wondering if you could talk a little bit about maybe some sustainability, energy efficiency goals that the design team might be looking at for the site and building design.
Valerie, I'll take that. Corey, thanks for the question. I think we're a little early on that, to be honest with you. We will have on several of our projects, you know, first of all, with the award of low-income housing tax credits, there's typically a standard that is required to be met. We typically, or often, have solar panels and things of that nature that are included in our development, which, you know, I'm sure when we get to the next phase with our site plan and the architectural review board, we'll have a much more detailed outline of that for y'all's consideration at that time, but we're just not far enough along in the architecture of that at this point.
Thank you.
Karen and Tony, I believe. So Karen, you can go ahead.
Karen? Unmute.
Yeah, getting there. I was curious to ask staff, if they're still on the call, how has 4 stories, that recommendation in the Places29 plan, been viewed in other developments? You have this difference between the zoning ordinance that allows up to 65 feet and the plan, which recommends a maximum of 4 stories. How has that been dealt with in other applications? Have we had anybody come in and ask for that kind of a waiver with step backs? Any staff still there?
Yes,
Yeah.
You can go ahead, Andy.
I'm honestly not aware of any projects off the top of my head. Right now, I can certainly ask some of our colleagues to see whether there are some other projects, you know, with a similar stance as this one, but right off the top of my head, I can't think of any.
I'll say this, I'm of 2 minds on this project. One is there are also a lot of objectives in the comprehensive plan or strategies in the plan that speak to redevelopment and the particularly sensitive nature of infill development or adjacent to existing communities. And we can't pretend that there aren't adjacent homes at a much lower density than this. And the plan's range of 6 to 34 units is exactly that. It is a range. And I think some of the infill language and the redevelopment language actually says, you know, developers can't necessarily anticipate densities at the higher end of this range, given what's going on, you know, with the existing neighborhoods and the compatibility of the design. I also kind of am concerned. I don't know how much of an opportunity there really is to build that kind of north parallel road. Or I don't think because of topographic issues it would go very far, but I would like to see a stronger connection there. But I still look at this and I feel like if I were a neighbor, I'd feel like I'm trying to put 8 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound bag. And so we got the affordable housing issue, the design issue, those have come up, both desirable goals. One part of me says, reduce the density on the back and let them go higher on the front and free up some more open space. But I don't know that that's doable. It's like, why not let them do structured parking and really make that more of an urban frontage along 29 and allow some relief and more open space on the parcel as a whole? That's probably maybe not their concept. But as a general comment, as a CAC member, I think we're going to see this over and over and over again. I don't think the plan has very good guidelines for how to deal with these issues on a site-specific basis. In some ways, I feel like there's a building that people want to build and they want to put it on this site, whether this site can respond appropriately to that and whether the neighbors can be adequately buffered from that. So you've got two competing goals here, and that's going to be difficult to resolve. And last thing I want to say is I really do think the higher densities in the plan, even at this range, even though it's not the top, are more, I think they were there when people were contemplating possibly transit or bus rapid transit. There's a lot of discussion about that in the Places29 plan and the comprehensive plan as a whole. And I'm wondering if there's any opportunity for Brook Hill, North Point, and some of the other developers in this area until the county actually has a working transit system that could go to a bus stop on this property, if these developers would be willing to participate in some sort of a private transit or some sort of supplemental funds to have some bus service going to these larger developments, especially ones with affordable housing, to get people that need to go to employment centers. So that's one thought I have about the, I mean, we have, if you're looking, has anybody seen the Rio Road issue? The staff report on that said it's right at the edge of town. It has the bus service it needs. It's near employment centers. It's everything we want in terms of urban residential density. This site isn't there yet, so I don't know if in the interim there might be something the development community might be willing to help do, kind of like the temporary bus and the 29 improvements are going on. So sorry, I talked too much.
Okay, Tony, you get the last word.
So.
Right next to the last.
Okay.
Okay.
So I would just say, if you haven't, take a look at Stacy or Michaela's information from Stacy concerning affordable housing units that have either been rented or sold. Now, B brought this up twice before, that 40 some odd houses in the last 10 years were sold under affordable housing. Stacy said that there were like 90 some odd that were available. So it would be basically a little less than 50% of the affordable housing for sale were sold under affordable housing. Now, in that same period of time, there were 240 some odd apartments under affordable housing that were all rented under affordable housing. Now, no other developer has suggested that they would offer 75% of the apartments for affordable rentals. Now, it just seems that if you are for affordable housing, if you are for those teachers and firefighters and whatever, when you know the track record, 100% in the past have gone for affordable housing, I think it's something to consider.
Okay.
That's all I have to say.
Okay. I don't think we're going to have time for the form-based code, and I did have some additional comments, but I wanted to just double check with. I'm going to rearrange the agenda a little bit. B and Corey, if they have any liaison updates for us.
Yes, I don't. Well, I just wanted to address Karen's issue and also Tony. Karen, I'm on the our Regional Transit Authority, and because of the pandemic, it's kind of been a gut punch as far as bus service. But frankly, Jaunt and our bus service, there are no fees. It's free rides for everybody for the next, it's either a year or 2 years, I'm not sure, but I know at least the next year. We will be looking at this site for some kind of a multimodal bus stop there, because we realize that if that does get built, that would be a good place to have it. Whether or not it's temporary, we don't know. That's why staff asked for 3 different sites there, but more than likely it would be on 29. May not be a fixed bus route. It may be an on-demand. We don't know yet. And to address Tony's issue, he's right. In the last 10 years, we've had 44 units of affordable housing units that have sold, but those were for sale, and they were at the 80% of AMI, which was way too high. And that's why the county is actually looking in our new affordable housing program or, document to lower that, because we realize 80% of AMI is not meeting even our first responders, our teachers, our firefighters, our police. We're not able, that's still too high for them. So in order to be able to have affordable housing that you can actually afford to buy, that has to be lowered. So I think that's why that didn't work. And so we're looking at a number of things. If you've heard Stacy Pethia, and you should look at our affordable housing, which we haven't approved yet, but we will be looking at that. And I welcome any comments on
Okay,
that. Thank you.
Corey, do you have anything for us?
No, as always, I think B has touched all the pertinent bases for this group. So
Okay.
now,
Okay, I did have some additional comments on the RST development, and in general, the revisions seem to be directed at mitigating the concerns of the Forest Lakes and Hollymead residents. But it seems to me that some of it is at the expense of the livability and the desirability of the apartment, the residents, of desirability of the living places in the apartments of the residents there. They've now got an additional story to deal with. And the other thing, I think it also sets a severe income disparity in terms of within the development. You're going to have six 3-story townhouses, which will be they'll be pretty expensive in addition to the two 2-on-2 townhouses. So you're going to have basically two, I think, widely separated income disparities within this development. And I don't know if that's going to create a problem or not. And let me see. As far as the overall reduction in the number of units, a lot of the concerns of the Forest Lakes people were the traffic issue, and going from 370 to 340, I don't think really addresses that. It's not that much. It's not a significant enough reduction to, alleviate the traffic problems that the residents of Forest Lakes feel will be created. The last comment I have is, in terms of the amenities, it seems like, and I know this is a preliminary plan, and there's the pool, the outdoor pool, and a tot lot. And if you've got a lot of 2, 3, 4 bedroom units there, the outdoor pool is an amenity for 3 months out of the year. For the other 9 months of the year, it's an empty space. There's no reason for anybody to go there. It's just a maintenance issue for 9 months out of the year. And a tot lot, once again, what the tot lot doesn't do the 7, 8, 9 up to 12, 13-year-olds that's not an amenity for them, so I would think that we want to rethink maybe some of the amenities in terms of the kinds of things that older children might make use of, in terms of, I know the plan mentions basketball courts, but they are not included. I think that the amenity issue needs to be looked at from the standpoint of, if you're going to have that many people in this small a space, there needs to be amenities that are going to be available and desirable year round, not just 3 months out of the year. And final point is, this is probably the first of several plots or areas along Route 29 that developers are going to come in and want to develop. We've already got an application for another one that we're looking at next month. So this is the first one of these types of things that are going to be on 29. And yes, they're going to be higher density, but I think it's important for the Planning Commission and supervisors to make sure that this one is done right. And it's not something that down the road is, you know, going to maybe create problems or deteriorate or not attract, you know, not be marketable, you know. So those are my comments on that. Anything else? If somebody wants to follow up on that, they feel free. Okay, we are getting along to 7:55. So if there's any, if there's nothing else, we can adjourn the meeting, and the next meeting will be Thursday, June 10th, 6:30 to 8 p.m. And Michaela, if you had prepared anything on the form-based code, you know, if you could maybe send that to us so that we can take that up at the next meeting, if we have time.
We made a video about form-based code in 2019, and I think it's still helpful to the group. So I'll email a link out to that. It's 7 minutes, so it's brief, and that's a resource to you. Before we wrap up, I think it would be helpful if Andy just quickly reminded, we still have like 10 people listening, the different options for sharing questions and feedback with him and the Planning Commission and the board. Do you mind doing that briefly, Andy?
Sure. Yeah, so if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to email them to me directly. And let me share my screen. I can put my email address back up. And so there we go. And also,
Okay.
I'm sorry. Okay. You can also email Valerie Long questions directly if you have any questions that you think she may be the more appropriate person to answer. And of course, if you have any comments prior to this upcoming Planning Commission meeting, you can email the Planning Commissioners at planningcommission@albemarle.org. That email address goes to all 7 of the Planning Commissioners. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I think in response to one of Karen's questions, the next Planning Commission meeting is not a public hearing because the public hearing has already been held, but it is at the discretion of the Planning Commissioners to determine whether to open the public hearing back up again to allow for additional comments. So that would be determined at that meeting. So if you do have questions or comments, I'd recommend at least emailing them directly to the Planning Commission prior to the meeting. Usually a few days prior is helpful so that the commissioners have the time to read them, and then still attend the meeting, as the commissioners may decide to open the public hearing back up again. And then certainly once it goes on to the Board of Supervisors, that is a public hearing. There is time scheduled in there for community members to ask, or well, really to provide comments. It is handled similarly to the first Planning Commission meeting, where it's a 3-minute time limit. And again, you're welcome to email comments to the Board of Supervisors prior to that public hearing as well. And as I mentioned, the Board of Supervisors meeting is not scheduled yet, but if you'd like to be notified when it is, just send me an email and I'll add you to my contact list, and I'll send a notice out to everybody when that meeting is scheduled. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else?
Bill, I had a real quick question. Does the Planning Commission expect any vote or any guidance from us as a group, or we just share individual comments?
Ari?
I think always the safest way is to send individual comments, and we all receive those. So that'll be my recommendation. And I'm here listening as well, so I've been jotting down some of the things that I've heard.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think there's a really a mechanism for, unless we, if we want, that could be something we could also put on the agenda for our meeting on June 10th if we want to draft up a statement of our concerns or comments. There's nothing preventing us from doing that, and it would be available to the planning commission and the supervisors. So we'll discuss putting that on the agenda for June 10th if that's amenable to everyone. I guess so. I'm not getting. All right. So it's 8 o'clock. If there's nothing else, we can go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Once again, the next meeting is June 10th, 6:30 to 8 p.m. And we're still online, right? As of next month. Yeah. Okay. So good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you,
night.
Bill.
Good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.